Welcome to the Beyond Boundaries podcast. Happy New Year. We are back. Yes, it was a long break. I'm really sorry. I am going to, at some point, do a breakdown episode of my story in 2019. It's been an interesting year, lots of change and transition. Due to that, I wasn't able to give my efforts to the Beyond Boundaries podcast, but today, an exciting day, it returns, and I'm actually really excited about this. I got some really good episodes that are already banked, and I got some interviews that I have scheduled that I'm really looking forward to, and lots of great stuff ahead. Something new this year is that I'm starting a Patreon page, patreon.com/Beyond Boundaries podcast. This is just a way for me to offset some of the expenses I incur for doing this podcast. I've had to purchase some new equipment to keep this going. Anything you can do to help would be amazing and awesome. And if you can't help, I totally get it. You can share, subscribe, rate the podcast. Those are other free ways that you can help that are easy to do and really mean a lot. I'm so looking forward to this podcast for 2020 and just all the things ahead that we're going to do with Beyond Boundaries. I got a chance to sit down with my friend, Tommy Airey. He's an awesome dude, like legit. He's the real deal. It isn't really an interview. It's more of a conversation. Tommy and I had connected back in 2018 when he spoke at the church I was leading while I was on vacation, and he came back in 2019 and spoke again for us, and this time I was actually around and able to connect with him personally, and we were just going to go get coffee and chat and get to know each other's stories a little deeper than we already had, and I thought to myself, hey, I'm pretty sure there's going to be some interesting stuff that we talk about, some good kind of connection that we have, and maybe some of the conversation would be good for the Beyond Boundaries podcast. So I said, I'm going to bring my recording stuff and we'll maybe do it that way. And so we weave in and out of a bunch of topics. I share some of my story, he shares some of his story, and we go down a few rabbit trails. But ultimately, I think it's a great conversation. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Hopefully you enjoy this story, this conversation with Tommy Airey. So Tom, how you doing?
Good. It's great to be back.
Yeah.
1 year later.
Yeah, 1 year later in PA. Yeah, you were with us a year ago. So why don't we just jump in by you telling people who you are, and then we're just going to have a catch-up conversation, because we were just going to get coffee, but instead we decided, why don't we record this conversation since we, get a chance to just connect in this way, and then just see where it goes, and maybe it'll be something I put on the podcast. We'll see. But why don't you introduce people to who you are if they've never met Tommy Airey? Who are you? What are you about?
If we're going to have a deep conversation, we might as well record it.
Yeah, exactly. Seriously. I feel like, and I said this to you, so many people, I think, want to be part of these conversations, but maybe they don't feel like there's people in their life that they can have these conversations with. And so I don't know about you, but for me, a lot of the podcasts I've listened to have kind of been these opportunities to not feel alone and to feel like I'm like, okay, I'm not in the room with those people, but I kind of feel like a oneness with them, in the sense that I'm having some of those same thoughts in my head that I'm hearing you affirm that they're not crazy. Does that make sense? Or I've seen those same things that you've seen, and they've kind of made my stomach turn too. Or and I think sometimes having, especially through the deconstruction process of my personal theology, having other people say it's okay, or other people that I respect or trust or just consider like somebody that I would listen to and take guidance from, give me permission to consider a different possibility that hasn't always been a possibility that my community has supported. Does that make sense? But that from a distance I'm able to hear. So who knows? Maybe some of what we talk about today will be encouraging to somebody. I can only hope so. But tell people who you are.
Yeah, so I'm a Southern California native. I grew up in Orange County, which is about an hour south of LA, in the suburbs. And after I went to the University of Kansas, go Jayhawks, I moved back to Orange County, and I was a high school teacher at a large public high school for 18 years. So I actually taught at the high school that I attended way back in the day. And so I taught social sciences, economics, government, AP World History. I was the athletic director for about 4 years. I coached basketball and cross country. And at the same time, was the advisor for Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and became an associate pastor at an evangelical church plant of Saddleback Church, huge mega church out there, and so grew up in what I would call white evangelicalism. I started going to a private Christian school when I was 10 years old, and I loved it. I fell in love with the Bible stories, and a faith in Jesus, and it was to put it on a map, a school where every morning after our Bible readings, the teacher would say, "God said it, I believe it, and that settles it," and it was just a clear-cut, absolute truth reading of the Bible. And there was probably the most popular young male teacher on campus would pass us in the hallways and say to us every time, without a doubt, "Good morning, young Republicans." So
Really?
it connected this kind of republicanism to evangelical Christianity, and those were the Reagan years, right? I mean, this was the beginning of this kind of powerful move for white evangelicalism, and what we see today, and then in my late 20s, as I was teaching, as I was traveling a lot, as I was getting to know students from diverse backgrounds, racially and ethnically, but also sexual orientation-wise, I mean, these issues became human and real for me. Yeah. And so undocumented students were coming out to me as undocumented. Gay and lesbian and trans students were coming out to me as queer and questioning, and still in the closet with their parents and friends from church and stuff like that. So to me, all of my categories were starting to get rearranged, and I started to ask questions, and those questions were not being received very well in church circles, if you know what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying. I know a little bit of what you're saying. So, and then you were, I don't know if you had said you were in Detroit for a while working. Share a little bit about your work in Detroit and what that was.
Yeah, so fast forward all the way to 2013, after my wife Lindsay and I got married in 2005, and we went to Fuller Seminary together for about 3 years, and got a degree there, and started some house churches in Orange County. Ended up meeting a guy by the name of Ched Myers, who is a biblical scholar and activist, and wrote an incredible book, incredible commentary on Mark's gospel called "Binding the Strong Man." And found out that he lived 100 miles north of us, and he was tremendously hospitable and invited us to come and visit, and we kept going up there on weekends and hanging out with he and his wife partner Elaine. And in 2013, they sent us on a 75-day road trip all over North America to just witness alternative expressions of Christian faith, what we would call radical discipleship, that are connecting faith centered in Jesus with social analysis and oppression and anti-oppression work all over the United States. So as a high school teacher, I had the summer off, and our lease was up in June for the little apartment that we were renting, and so we threw all of our stuff in storage and hit the road and met some incredible people. And on that road trip in 2013, it was a discernment trip for us, because we knew, and we had continued to have this placed on our hearts, that we knew, like, for our discipleship, that we needed to move out of the suburbs and apprentice ourselves to some people who are taking cues from the margins and have been doing that for decades. So when we rolled through Detroit for 48 hours in 2013, we fell in love with the people and the place, and were blown away by the work that they were doing and the stories that they were telling. And so we made a decision the next summer to to move to Detroit. So in 2014, I retired from teaching, and we raised some support to move for a year, and we ended up staying for about 4.5 years, and lived in the city, and worked with an intentional community there, but also an Episcopal church there, and kind of threw in with the organizing work around water shutoffs in the city of Detroit. They're shutting people's water off who are 2 months behind on their bills, and it's all poor black folks. And so it's what we learned really quick was that water shutoffs and tax foreclosures were all part of the gentrification scheme in the city of Detroit.
Oh, wow.
So it's a clearing out method, and it creates all this open space for white folks to move in and set up shop.
Sure. So, where do you live now? You've moved from Detroit now. So share with people where you live now, what you're doing there, and what you're passionate about.
So believe it or not, we have moved to Bend, Oregon, Central Oregon, a place so different than Detroit. It's hard to even imagine. But we moved to Bend. Lindsay's brother has been living in Bend. Okay. Greg and his wife Casey and our nephew Milo. Been living there for about 5 years, and that was something that was really on our hearts. After being in Michigan and on the road a lot for more than 4 years, we realized that we wanted to be close to family, and that has been great the last 6 months. Mm-hmm. But the other part of it is that we really continued to feel called to a white majority space. And in 2015, we were with a group of organizers, and one of the black women, a mentor to us, asked white people in the room, white organizers. She said, since the civil rights movement, we've been asking you to move to the suburbs and go to the suburbs because we can't, and we need voices in that wilderness. And we need bridge builders in that space to connect them, white folks, to this movement. And that was a challenge for us.
For sure.
At that time, we were not ready to move back to what we came from, and we weren't ready for that. But I think more and more on our hearts, we feel like that is part of our vocation. These are the people we love. These are the people we know. And we see that these are folks that need bridge builders. They need help connecting the dots with like how is it that we can change the world? How can we transform the world? How can we create liberation and healing for the globe? And these are people with a lot of power and privilege, and that can do that. So.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the tension, right? Like using your influence in the right space, but then trying to figure out, like, do I have an obligation to be with those who are maybe in a difficult circumstance, or is my best power and privilege being not in living in that space maybe, but influencing the space over here? Like, and obviously I think there's a value in both, but I think that's a good word when you think about the realities of those spaces often not having voices that are pushing back against some of the narratives that exist in those spaces. So that's awesome. How do you like Oregon?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is beautiful. The rivers and the lakes and the mountains, and in Bend, Oregon, it's the high desert. Mm-hmm. It's a really unique climate. It's sunny 300 days a year, and but it has seasons, and it's really one of the most beautiful places we've ever been. So yeah,
very good. Well, I don't really have an agenda or questions or anything. We're just catching up. So I wanted to make sure anybody listening got a brief intro to who you are. Oh, and you have a book, of course, that we should plug. So Descending Like a Dove. It's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon. Came out with it about a year ago.
Yeah.
Descending Like a Dove.
Anytime writing a book, man, that's legit. How long did that take you to do?
Yeah, it took about 2 years to write.
Was it like a grueling grinding process, or was it like
at times?
fun?
Yeah. It was peaks and valleys, and an experience that I'll be, forever grateful for, to be able to really process.
Yeah.
The evangelicalism that I grew up with. The subtitle is Adventures in Decolonizing Evangelical Christianity, and so the first third of the book is my story of being in white evangelicalism and my mindset and what I was trained in, and then the kind of cognitive dissonance that slowly kind of took me over, the kind of tension that I lived in, of these different beliefs that I was trained up in that no longer were compelling or relevant to me, but I couldn't leave Jesus behind. And as I read theologians like James Cone and Ched Myers and a whole lot of others, realized that the Jesus that was handed to me was a Jesus that's been hijacked. It's a Jesus that's kind of made for folks in power, and it's a Jesus that's made to keep the status quo going for a few people, while the rest of humanity is suffering.
So that book, I would assume, even just the subtitle of that book, with it being Columbus Day today, decolonizing. We're doing a conversation tonight about that. I think it'll be interesting to see who shows up for. I love the title, Rising Above Christopher Columbus Christianity. Like, I just love that, because it's like, okay, we can do better than this. Like, I don't have to I think there's plenty of bombs to throw that direction, but I think it's also about just saying, like, let's learn from that and let's do better. Let's rise above that. Like, let's not repeat that history. Let's not keep that history going. That's even still here. What do you think about on this day? Like, obviously, we're going to have a really long-form conversation tonight, but what are your initial thoughts, even as you've kind of, we're already more than halfway through the day. It's 5:00. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what have you been thinking on, praying on, meditating on today as you think about this holiday? And just, I guess, what it means for us as followers of Jesus, like those who are trying to live in a Christ-like way.
I think, back in the early 90s, it was cities like Berkeley, California, and Boulder, Colorado, these kind of progressive hubs in the United States that really started to officially sponsor an Indigenous Peoples Day. They got rid of Columbus Day and said, we're going to take this opportunity to flip the script here in an appropriate way. And really put the emphasis on the indigenous peoples that were and continue are victims of genocide. And so I think that Columbus Day gives us an opportunity to reflect on our own history, and not just the history of the United States, but the history of Christianity. And the great news is that Christianity is plural. It's actually Christianities. Like, there are several perspectives on who Jesus was and what that means for us. And so for us to be reminded of these kind of colonial Christianities that have had the power and have had the popularity and have kind of moved the world for centuries ought not have the last word. And for me, that's what I'm passionate about. We do not have to leave the faith in this journey, in this spiritual journey that we have. Some people do, and I understand it. I get it. They've grown up in Columbus Christianity and fundamentalism, and there's so much trauma that comes with it that I understand that. However, there is a minority report throughout history that is really compelling, that takes Jesus at face value and takes Jesus in context as a prophetic voice that calls us to real greatness, right?
Yeah.
And it's the Columbus Christianity that's hijacked what greatness means, and is now the political motto, right? Let's make America great again. But when Jesus talked about greatness, he talked about service. He talked about sacrifice. He talked about loving people so much that you're willing to lay down your life for them, and that means loving everyone, not just your family, not just the people who think like you, and certainly not the people that look like you or love like you, and that's, to me, what this day, the kind of opportunity that this day gives us, to push back and to subvert together. And as you say, like at the beginning of this podcast, there are millions of us all over North America that are second guessing Columbus Christianity.
Sure.
And yearning for something different.
I think I mean, obviously we're picking on Christopher Columbus, but it is his day. So it's fair to do so. But I think any Christianity that's done from a position of power, it just doesn't seem like, when you look back through church history, that the church looks very Christ-like when it's in power.
That's right.
I look at I look at all the different seasons of church history, and it just seems like when the church is in power or seeking to be in power, that's even the worse, I think, sometimes. There's some sketchy things that are done in the name of Jesus, and Jesus begins to get skewed into whatever category or whatever explanation. The Bible gets skewed into whatever explanation can get that power. I even just watched a Netflix series. I forget the name, but it's the one about the prayer breakfast. Have you heard of this?
The Family.
Oh, dude, that was creepy. I watched that. I was like, what in the world? You should totally go watch The Family if you haven't seen it. But it's pretty much all about power, but then even shadow power, trying to have political power and control, but to stay in the shadows while having it, and creating this national prayer breakfast, which, as someone who did grow up in very Republican circles, similar to your experience, I went to Liberty University. I don't know that there's a more Republican experience at a college than that, but I always thought of the National Prayer Breakfast as a bipartisan faith gathering, and now you see it as there are people on both sides, but this is all about amassing political influence and power, and in the name of Jesus, or in the name of the Bible, or in the name of God, and just it. I don't know. It's so hard to think that Jesus would not be calling that out if he was here today in a way that would just really frustrate a lot of people that are in those positions, or that are benefiting from that system of power. I don't know. I mean, it gave me chills watching it. My wife walked in on episode 3 I was watching. She hadn't watched the first few episodes. She's like, "What are you watching?"
She caught you.
It's creepy, right? This is creepy. More. She jumped in halfway through an episode and was like, "This is weird. What is this?" And I had to pause it and explain to her what was going on. But I mean, and going to Liberty gave me, Jerry Falwell and hearing even some of his quotes about the desire to create the moral majority that would put Reagan in office, that would in essence create this frenzy of God patriotism, God and patriotism connecting in this fresh new way, I guess. And I really, what helped me through my deconstruction was a lot of the Anabaptist tradition, because the Anabaptist traditions for me, I began to see a group that is centered on Jesus. Does that make sense? There's a Jesus-centric reality, and a desire to stay disconnected from the systems and powers and structures of the world. Now, some people take that really, really, really far, and like the Amish would be part of the Anabaptist community, you know. Right. And by the way, if you don't know what Anabaptist means, it just means baptize again. During the Reformation, they wanted to be baptized again, in essence, not acknowledging their infant baptism, not acknowledging the Catholic Church in that way. And so, anyway, you can Google it. But what I loved about it was like you have these radical Anabaptists at the time of like Vietnam who are burning their draft cards and doing it in the name of Jesus. Yeah. And like this, and I'm like, I was never taught this. This wasn't something that like Liberty taught me in the church. But they were like, Jesus says we can't like kill people. We have to love our enemies. We can't love our enemies by going and killing them. Like that's antithetical to our faith. Like, and that to me that is rising above Christopher Columbus Christianity. Right. Like saying, I'm willing to take the penalty for burning my draft card. That's right. Which is going to be that I know the consequences for what I'm doing here. I'm going to get arrested, and I know that's part of the reality of the circumstance I live in, but I can't violate my conscience in this way because I feel called to something higher. And I just sense that like so often as Christians, we just kind of go with the flow. It's hard to evaluate sometimes because you get caught in that almost just like trance of like going through the motions until you get exposed to the people that if you get the opportunity to, the people that ultimately hurts, or the realities of those beliefs and how it's even hurting you. Yeah. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. So when were you confronted with radical Anabaptism? Is that when you were reading Shane Claybourne?
So Shane Claybourne, I read Shane Claybourne in college, and that would have been like Irresistible Revolution. Mm-hmm. I don't think I really put the Anabaptists together in there. I just think I put like, wow, this guy's really Jesus-centered in everything.
And that wasn't on the required reading list at Liberty.
No, I don't know how I got that, actually. I'm trying to think back, like, how did I get that?
That's scandalous.
I know, seriously. I probably could have gotten it.
If Jerry Jr. knew.
To be fair to Liberty, Shane Claybourne's been to Liberty. Mm-hmm. But, like, I don't... He wasn't there during my time, but he was later. But anyway, I don't know how I got that book. I think honestly, and this is just Relevant Magazine was something I read, and the podcast was something I listened to. They were one of the first like Christian podcasts, like, and they would share things that, like Shane Claybourne's book or things like that, or an interview with him or something. And I think I just was like, I'm interested in hearing more from this guy. And I did that. I don't think that really connected the dots for me, though, to Anabaptism necessarily, because I didn't really know what it was. We didn't talk at all about the Anabaptists in church history, like, which is so fascinating, like looking back at it now and seeing like the influence they've had, especially even in just Western Christianity. Like they are a legitimate like subset of Christianity within, like, we learned about all kinds of other legitimate, subsets, but just we didn't. I don't think Liberty had a whole lot to focus on about the peacemakers, the nonviolent. You know what I mean?
The sectarians.
Yeah. I don't know that they thought too kindly. So, after I got out of Liberty, so I went to Liberty from 2002 to 2006, and then I went to a mega church as the high school youth pastor at a mega church. Was there for a year and a half.
In Virginia? Or
in Northern Virginia, so like D.C. area, like highly affluent, Loudoun County, which is like, the year I was there was the richest average mean income county. You just got so many people working in D.C., lobbyists / just CEOs, all kinds of people. So government contractors, all those people. So ran a youth group there. Youth group did really well. Loved the kids. Went well, but it became the church was, well, in my experience at the time, the church was very corporate, all about numbers. Mm-hmm. So I got put on probation as a youth pastor until I grew the youth group to a certain size. Literally, my probation said you have 90 days to grow the youth group to this size, or you're fired.
Wow. It wasn't even theological. It was just numbers.
No theology. No. And no.
Which has a theology in it.
Can I say also no, like, practical? The only practical thing was, we'll give you all the resources you need. My boss literally told me you could give away an iPad or an iPod every week.
Wow.
And I said, but if I do that, the kids that I have here that are here are going to be out. Like, you know, it was a very interesting, like, situation, I guess, that I was in. Because we were actually making a lot of traction, reaching a lot of kids, new kids, and like, but in that culture, you're not going to reach people giving away an iPod. They have everything. They're rich.
They've got 'em.
You reach people by like showing up to their basketball games when their dad doesn't because he's working 80 hours a week. You reach people when you like build relationships, and we were doing that. But that's not overnight work. You know what I mean? That takes time, and it takes building up a volunteer base of leaders that can buy into that vision too, that are also busy, that are also trying to run the rat race, you know? So like I was in that process, and ultimately it just led to me saying, I started that probationary period. I was a week into it, and I was just like, even if I get to these numbers, it's just going to be another number after this. It's just going to be another number after that. And ultimately, the values are just not where they needed to, where they were when I got here. And so, and part of that was there was a big staffing change while I was there, and so new values came in. I understood that. It is what it is. So I went to Boston and did some work, community organizing, really kind of renewing my heart for ministry, because at that point I kind of, to be honest, like had my finger to the church walking out in that time. Like I was just like very angry, because I was angry because I'm like, I spent all this time going to school to become a youth pastor for this. No. I could go make money. Like I'm not trying to be like cocky, but I'm just more like, I feel confident that I could go work hard for a company and make a lot of money and like crunch numbers all day and like get numbers. Like
if we're going to do the numbers game,
then I want to go do it and make money doing it. Like I'm not gonna, well, and it's not, well, it was more like just so superficial that it was like, if I'm going to do something superficial with my life, then I'll go do something superficial with my life. But like, that's not why I got into ministry, to do superficial stuff. I don't know if that makes sense. It was just this like click in my head, and like, and I kind of was seeing a lot of ministry through that lens. And I was just like connecting with friends who were having similar experiences in their churches, even if they were smaller. And so like, I just started kind of getting to the point where I was like, maybe every church experience is going to be like this. And,
so what grabbed you in Boston?
Well, I had an opportunity there, and went to place called Dorchester, and it's in South Boston.
I thought you were going to say Fenway Park, but that's another story. That's another story.
I was in Fenway Park a lot too. I'm a huge Red Sox fan, but no, and so my job, we would have youth groups come in every week through the summer, and other times they'd come through too. And my job was to every day prepare all the supplies they needed for whatever work site they were at. So I would get out like weed eaters, lawnmowers, but my job also was to connect with each of those work sites. And those work sites were people in the community. And by people in the community, I mean like the widow who couldn't mow her lawn. And I would have to go connect with her. And so I would be like, so here's what you're going to do. You're going to go mow Widow Mary's lawn, but then you're going to go inside, because it's only going to take you about 30 minutes to mow her lawn. You're going to sit for an hour. She's going to make you tea, and you guys are going to talk about her husband. She's going to ask all kinds of questions about you, but make sure you get her to talk about her husband. And so like I was building relational connections, and like with tons of people in the community, people going through chemo who couldn't take care of what they needed to take care of, people who had violations for their property that they had to fix or they were going to get evicted. And so we would come in and like try to fix the things in their property that we could. And like we'd have youth work teams work alongside construction people to try to get it cheaper, like just all kinds of things. But I was connecting with like on the ground real stuff. And I was like, my heart was renewing for ministry, quite honestly. Like I think God knew I needed that experience. At the same time I'm having that experience, I'm living in a Salvation Army communal housing with, I think we had 15 plus people there. A lot of Gordon Conwell theology students, seminary students. And we'd have to get up every morning.
Sounds like the family. Were you you sponsoring prayer breakfast?
No, I don't think we were the family. I mean, it was fun.
Different kind of family.
It was different kind of family. But like we would have dinners together. You'd have to cook once a week. Dinner for the whole family, or like once every other week. I don't know. It's something like that. And then, and every morning we'd have devotions together, and the devotions were centered around whoever had to be to work earliest. and we'd set the clock the night before, and everybody had to get up, and a lot of people would go right back to bed, but it would be like sometimes like 5 a.m., 4:30 a.m., but like devotions every morning. And devotions were really just like more like centering prayers for the day. And I'm just like experiencing this as like this is interesting. This isn't the way I've even ever done devotions before. So a lot was being just challenged in that space that I didn't recognize. And then probably one of the biggest things that was being challenged was I began, because I was close enough to high school, okay? Because at this point, I'm 3 years graduated from college, you know? I still remember high school enough to know like friends who were in high school and like, and like taking my SAT and doing all that. And I'm seeing kids in Dorchester who have better SAT scores than me, struggling to get into college. And I was kind of shared this idea that like, hey, if you're African American and you want to go to college, oh man, the world's open for you because you're a minority. And like, I'm realizing none of that is not true. Like, I'm sure there's all kinds of options, like, sure, but there's a lot of ceilings that these minority communities are hitting that I never even, I just breezed right through. And not just around education, but all kinds of things that I'm recognizing, like, I'm more likely to get, like, or I'm more likely to, like, be breezing through the convenience store with my book bag where this guy gets stopped. Like, you know what I mean? Or, like, just things that I had never had to actually experience before because of my white privilege, to be honest. That like living in a predominantly, it was predominantly a Dominican community. Like I began to see like the realities of being a person of color. And not that I am even fully aware of those realities today, just I began to see that the stereotypes that I had been handed growing up didn't fit reality in this community. And that started me on a journey to begin listening to voices that were very different than my own, and to begin to like consider that maybe some of what I've been handed didn't come from firsthand experience. And yeah, so that, and then ultimately I went from there to Wisconsin, to a great church. That was exactly what I needed. It was a family, just a great community that, the ministry flourished there. It was highly relational. And ultimately it like, I got elevated to interim lead pastor from the youth pastor position. But it didn't work out for me to get ordained within that denomination. And that was hard, but ultimately I have a deep love for that community. I love the people there. It was a great time. So many great relationships with students, like 7 years of ministry with students for me, I saw many students through middle school and high school, and like, or through their 4 years of high school. And like, those are relationships that even still today, like on Facebook, I'll get a message from a student here or there, and like, we'll chat, and like, it's just good to connect with many students in that way. And I'm sure you have some of those as being a teacher, people that you still connect with. And like, it's a good feeling to be like, okay, like I'm still connected to this part back here, this work that I did way back here. Some of those seeds are still sprouting. And I was literally texting with a student today, a former student who hasn't been in church for like maybe 2 years, I don't know, a long time, a while, and went to church. And he's like, so the church I went to, and it was this like mega church. And he's like, the church I went to handed me a bulletin, and inside of it was their merch brochure for all of their church's merch. And I'm like, so how did that make you feel? Like, so we're like talking about it, but it's like, but I'm able to have like, I'm able to continue to be a spiritual influence in a lot of those kids' lives, which is like huge. Now they're young adults, married, many, some with kids. Like, so it's cool to connect with them. And now I'm here in PA doing work in central Pennsylvania. And so it's been quite the roller coaster ride. But my initial thing to Anabaptism, to get back to your question, because I just gave you my whole lineage there. But
background.
But while I was in Wisconsin, I was finishing up my seminary, and I took a course on textual criticisms, which is supposed to shore up my faith in the Bible, and it did the exact opposite. I began to be like, no, your explanation for that is not good enough. Like, your explanation for that is not good enough. Like,
nice try.
yeah. Well, like, the cognitive dissonance I had already become, like, aware of, like, the realities of, like, okay, that's not consistent, Justin. That thought right there alongside that belief is not, they're not, they can't be in the same place. They can't operate. And especially they can't operate in the same ministry, because I was starting to really put flesh on a lot of my beliefs and like the effect it had on people. Yeah. And words like inerrancy, infallibility, words that, by the way, the Bible doesn't even use to describe itself as, like, became very difficult terms for me to use. And I had a house of cards moment where I always say I preached the Bible for about 3-4 weeks on Sunday mornings to the whole church when I didn't even know if I believed the Bible. Like, period. Like, I was like, did I just get handed a bunch of fairy tales and like I was told it was inerrant and infallible? Like, that was my mindset for about 3-4 weeks. Oh. And I always say, like, kind of Anabaptism in a lot of ways brought me back. Greg Boyd, Bruxy Cavey, Greg Boyd especially, like, he did a lot of work on, like, I listened to a lot of his talks on the Bible. Like, the Bible is generally reliable is what he said. And I said, okay, I can get with that. Generally reliable and like, and inspirational for our lives. And I'm just sitting here like, okay, I don't disagree with those two statements. And like, and then just like the idea of like, isn't that enough? Like, and I was like, oh, I mean, not in my circles that I run in, like, you know what I mean? And it's got to be way more. It's got to be perfect. It's got to be exactly what, you know. And I think saying the Bible's inspired is I can get behind that. I can even get behind like God inspired it. Like I can get behind a lot of. The problem is the moment you begin to like make it this thing it isn't. Like I begin to kind of, the thing I keep telling people too is like, I don't want to read the Bible literally. I want to read it literately. Like, this is literature that was written to a particular people group at a particular time with a particular agenda. Right. Like, some of these books have agendas. They're trying to convince people of something. You can't remove that, quote one verse, and then tell me that, like, I better change X, Y, or Z because that one verse, when you've taken it completely out of context, completely out of the group that it's being written to, the author that's writing it, the time and place in which the politics of what's happening, the geography of what's happening, all of these things play huge roles in understanding the text. And so the more I began to kind of dive down that wormhole, the more I realized, like, wow, I actually think the Bible is more alive than it's ever been in my life, because I'm not reading it as a systematic mathematical equation that I need to solve, but I'm reading it as like this like piece of history that and stories of interactions with people that has all this life and all this profound implications on like how I live my life, like in ways that like I didn't expect. I began to see, I mean, probably the most powerful story during that whole time was the woman at the well. Like the Samaritan woman at the well. Like, you just don't talk a lot about how radical it was for Jesus to sit with a Samaritan woman at a well. Like, in his context, doesn't get more radical than that. And then one-on-one, and then to ask her for a drink of water, which is a pickup line around a well in those days. Like, and not that Jesus was giving a pickup line, but he was actually placing dignity upon her to where, like, no one would ever ask her questions like that, and then to be even willing to drink after her, like, and this is the first person he says he's the Messiah to, a woman, a Samaritan woman, who's likely probably a prostitute from what we gather, or at least she's been in a lot of relationships. She doesn't have a great track record when it comes to like being faithful. And Jesus is like, this is the first person that's going to know that I'm the Messiah. The disciples are just following a cool new rabbi. Like that, I mean, they're a cool new teacher. Like, they don't know he's the Messiah yet. None of them have said that. But like, she's like, yeah, when that guy comes, we'll know. Well, I'm that one. And like,
it's a perfect person to come out to.
Exactly.
As Messiah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's exactly where I was like, so Jesus starts his ministry at the margins, and then Jesus dies at the end of his ministry. being accused of being one of those people at the margins.
Oh.
Yet we want to be in power, but we want to say we're being like Jesus while we're in power. That's it. The kingdom is upside down. The kingdom is not the idea of being in power. And so, I don't know. So, like, yeah, my journey is, it seems like we have pretty similar journeys, because you were at Saddleback for a while there, like at a mega church experience, which I'm sure, I'd love to hear a little bit about that experience. And I want to be clear, like, I don't want to, like, trash churches or, like, you know, but I just more mean, like, when you wake up to something or you see something, it's like, it's hard not to see it after you see it. It's hard not to be, like, that's what I actually signed that the probationary period thing, and I was like, okay, for 90 days I'll do this, because I was just like, but then like a week later I was like, I've already seen this. This is how we operate. I can't unsee this. Like, even if we accomplish the number we're trying to reach, I can't do ministry with joy now that I've seen this. Yeah. And I don't think we're going to change this. I'd love to be an agent of change maybe in this place, but at that time I didn't have the influence to do that. Oh, and yeah, that was my position. So I'd love to hear, like, your experience through some of those transitions, because they are like all their own little, like, I don't know, mile markers of sorts. Like when you hit one, it's like, ooh, this kind of hurts, but it's also kind of feels like something I should acknowledge as movement in my story. And maybe now the landscape looks different and the car has to change. That's going to get me to the next mile marker. I don't know.
Yeah. And it's what Jamison and I were talking about a little bit this morning. Yeah. I will always be grateful and continually grateful today for the kind of passion and warmth that is embedded in the evangelical movement. There is something to the evangelical culture that I continually long for and yearn for in those spaces, and that's, you know, I think I'm still looking for that outside of evangelicalism, and it's why I talk about yearning for a Christian faith that transcends fundamentalism and liberalism. There is something. There is a third way. You know, there's something radical that decolonizes out there that's untapped. Like, I think a lot of us are kind of spiritually homeless because we're not going to walk into an evangelical church. It's in the words of Mark Knoll, who's a evangelical church historian. The first line of his, like, classic book is the scandal of the evangelical mind is that there is no life of the mind. It's anti-intellectual. You have to check your brain at the door, and there is no conversation. There's a whole bunch of fear over anything that goes outside those boundaries. And but it's like on the left in a lot of mainline churches and a lot of Catholic churches it's just a different culture that is like, it's foreign to me. Yeah. And so there is still this kind of evangelical impulse that I still long for.
Yeah, there's definitely a warmth in a community that, and I think in my communities, like, that I grew up in that were evangelical, like a true family vibe to a certain extent. I don't think it was family to the extent of, like, really carrying each other's burdens, but, like, enough to feel like you could be honest if you chose to be with people, at least in, like, that were close to you. And, like, I think that's good about the community. The other thing is, like, I think the problem with some of what I see I'll just share from our experience as a church. We get a lot of people who come from more liberal churches, I guess you could call them liberal, whatever you want to call them, like, that are like, we don't talk about Jesus at all. Yeah, and I want a church that talks about Jesus, but I don't want to go to an evangelical church. It's like, yeah, churches should probably talk about Jesus. Like, and look, I don't want to be critical of churches that I don't know what their experience is or what they're reaching out to and how they're structured. But if that's something you're looking for,
Yeah.
A Jesus-centered church that's not an evangelical church, but that maybe still has the warmth of like a community that I can connect with. And, geez, there's just not many out there that I've seen, at least around here. And it's tough.
Yeah. And the kind of vulnerability and authenticity, evangelicalism at its best that offered that kind of personal transformation that I don't find on the left. I don't find in mainline denominations very often. And like the classic example is like growing up in white evangelicalism and being a part of the youth group and like being a part of the guys group in high school and, keeping each other accountable for masturbation. It's like you got a bunch of guys like sharing about masturbation, and I mean that's this is open. We're gonna be real, but it's like let's go beyond that and let's talk about whiteness. Let's talk about patriarchy. Let's talk about homophobia. And let's be confessional about this. Like this is deep in us. We can share these things, and we have this. This biblical text that screams grace and mercy and forgiveness and a God who loves us no matter what. So we can be bold,
definitely,
and we can come out of hiding and share these things, and we can be people that are anti-oppression, But that's not what's happening in a lot of spaces on the left, where people feel pressure that they have to have all their shit together and be pure politically. Like you got to say all the right things at all the right times, or else you're banished.
And I'll say this: one of the things I'm learning about is like cancel culture. Like, have you heard about this cancel culture? Like the idea that like the moment someone says something wrong, we cancel them. Yeah. Like they're done. Like, and you're even kind of seeing this like right now with Ellen. So she sits next to George W. Bush in a suite, and they're seen smiling and laughing while she's like showing him something funny on the phone. And look, I think there's a way to acknowledge the evils an individual has done, and whether or not you believe that that's who George W. Bush is, what he's done, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, so now you're going to cancel culture Ellen for that? Like, for that? And like her response was so good, but like it doesn't, if you become so woke, that like I say it sometimes, like Allie and I, sometimes we're in staff meetings and I'd be like, some of these people are so woke, they just need to go take a nap. Like there's just like this picture of like,
they need a power nap.
Woke, I'm so woke that I get to pass judgment when people don't act as woke as I am. And I'm like, but that is a form of fundamentalism in itself.
That's right.
Like, you're now just picking up a different form of fundamentalism.
Ton of fear.
And it's all based on fear. Exactly. It's all based on, well, what happens if we let that person get away with that thing? And again, I want to be clear, like I am coming from a position of privilege. So like whenever I argue for kindness or forgiveness, I want to also acknowledge that like those can be used as weapons against people too.
That's right.
Like in a way of against progress. Like, so I don't want to say that there's maybe not a time where canceling somebody or just shutting them off or just saying, or boycotting. Boycotting was very popular within the civil rights movement. So I'm not going to say boycotting isn't something that's that can be helpful and healthy. But I think we do it so quickly now because of social media. We do it so flippantly, and it becomes like a crucifixion of somebody, a scapegoating, like a lynch mob even, like of like, we're just going to take this person out to make ourselves feel better about ourselves. It's way more, in my opinion, connected to pride and ego than actually a desire for progress and justice and change. And that's hard sometimes because I sometimes agree with the community, like what their desire is. But the way we're doing it, it's not going to reconcile anything. It's going to push people further into their spaces and like.
And it's why we so desperately need church spaces so we can build trust, we can have good faith, we can have real conversations, we can confess, and we can forgive each other, and we can step in it, and still be there with each other the next day.
Yeah.
And I think we just lack those spaces. And even you point out brilliantly the civil rights movement. Like the civil rights movement boycotted, but that was a step along the journey.
Yeah.
Like they were committed to having relationships with business owners who were denying black folks service first, and they had conversations, and they walked alongside, and they wanted, and there was negotiation that was part of it. And then when all of those steps did not come to fruition, they boycotted.
Yeah.
You know, so we that's our first step now.
Yeah.
You know, it's
and
like
it's boycott through a tweet, deplatform somebody, remove their whatever their monetization is, whatever their platform is, and threaten their career. And I guess my thing on that is like, so what happens in the aftermath of that? In the aftermath of that, the people affected by that, the individual or the other people, are less likely to learn the lesson, I would say. Like, and not that it's your job to teach them a lesson, but I guess I'm saying like, it's less likely that you actually see progress and change when that's...
It's not a safe space.
It's not... And look, everywhere can't be a safe space, and I understand that. Like, that's the world we live in. I don't think you and I could spend the rest of our lives and a multitude of others trying to make social media a safe space. That ship has sailed, in my opinion. The genie's out of the bottle. Like, I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But churches can... And by safe, I mean radical, but radical in the way in which we extend grace. And even at times when we sit across the aisle from someone in our church that's part of our same community, and we say, it is so hard to love you right now with the beliefs you have. But at the very least, I'll cling to the fact that Jesus calls me to love my enemies, and the beliefs you have right now are the beliefs that I would even say like embody what I just can't even bring myself to consider. But my calling is to love you. And I'm going to keep extending that love for you. And another big story for me, Saul to Paul. Like Saul's transformation to me is so amazing, because we always focus on the power of Jesus in that story, in the sense of like Jesus blinds Saul on the road. Like, but like we don't pause and talk about Ananias in the story, who's the one who comes and heals Saul and prays for him. And the first thing he says when he walks in the door, and he's even like had this conversation like of like, but you do know like Saul's coming to kill us. Like, are you sure we want to work with this guy? Like maybe we got our phone line crossed here. I don't know that this guy is the guy we want to. But once he's convinced that like this is part of like God can redeem even Saul, even the one who was at the stoning of Stephen, and like breaking out of persecution in the church that's forced us into Samaria, of all places, as Jewish people. Does that make sense? Yeah. He goes in, and the first thing he says is, brother Saul. And, like, that's important. Like, Saul hasn't shown any repentance yet. No. Saul doesn't know that Saul's actually, like, not going to kill him and his friends and his family. Like, but there's this picture of, like, unity and connectedness that I feel like the early church was more open to radical love of enemies, that I think is transformative in all of the cancel culture stuff, because I think we prefer to cancel our enemies. Not different, circling all the way back to Columbus Day, not different from that colonialist mindset of like, we conquer our enemies. Now we might just conquer them on a different platform, social media, or, canceling them. However, the church could be a huge light in the 21st century of like, here's how we do community when we disagree. And not that we just like this utopia that we're like not going to have difficult conversations. We're all just going to believe the same thing. But like, how can we hold various beliefs while championing? And I think you have to have a rally point. That's, I think, the big deal. If you're going to organize your communities around boundaries, then you're just going to be the next fundamentalist church. Like, it might be fundamentally liberal, or it might be fundamentally conservative, or fundamentally whatever. But if you can instead say, like, there's a well we all get a drink out of, and here's what it looks like. And let's organize our life around that well. And everyone's invited. I don't care where you're at. I don't care how far away from the well you are, how close. It's all about moving closer to the well.
Yeah.
So what can I do to get you closer to the well? I don't care where you're at right now. Take a few steps toward the well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That to me is the image that I think of the church being, and hopefully being like just reconciling a lot of the hurt we've caused in my lifetime, at least.
Yeah.
If we could be that kind of space.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it's all, as you're sharing, what's coming up for me is that I think it's why white male caucus space is really important in the church, because I think it's the white men that are inflicting a lot of the trauma on those most vulnerable, on women, on queer and questioning folks, on people of color. And so I think we need to have these spaces where it's just all white men working our shit out, and with each other, you know.
100%.
So we're not inflicting all of this stuff on everybody else.
Leadership in churches, as far as elders go, is predominantly white men.
Yeah.
And then also in denominations is predominantly white men.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm beside myself because I've had my own experiences with that. And like, it's hard for me because I'm a straight white man.
Right.
And I don't want to like deplatform people because of their race or because of their, you know, sexual orientation, you know, or because of their age. Like none of that. Like, but when you have so much of one particular demographic represented in places of power that have legitimate and binding influence, and you can't see that, even when people have, or you just explain it like, well, who else would be here? Like, we'll find people. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it shows that the problems we have are problems of a system and a structure, more so than problems of just like chance moments where people miss the mark. Right. Like, these will continue to be repeated
Deeply embedded.
If we don't shift and change and move, and like, and it's not new. We've had these issues throughout church history. Like, but I think it's becoming more and more. Our culture is becoming more and more open to progress. I think, at least the younger generation, in my experiences. Like, I don't know what your experience has been, but like, a lot of people we're reaching that are in that millennial / Generation Z demographic think it's crazy that a church or a denomination would remove a pastor's credentials because they were affirming. Mm-hmm. Like, they can't understand it. Like, and there are also people who believe in Jesus. Like, they're not just, you know. And so I guess I don't think that's crazy, because I grew up in a different generation. I mean, I'm at the top end of millennial, 35. I don't think that's crazy because I've lived in that world so long that to me it's like, I get you. This is what you do to people who go outside the boundaries. Right. This is what you're trained to do. Yeah. You ghost them, like you said yesterday in the Sunday service. Like, if you don't outright tell them to their face they're a sinner and they're going to hell, like, or, you know, try to tell them they're a wolf in sheep's clothing. If you don't go right out and say it, then at the very least you ghost them. You don't associate with them anymore. You move on to the next thing. You forget
Silence.
them. Like, they're out. You know. Yeah. And if so, like, I know that culture. It's shocking to me to see how many young people are like, what? I'm appalled by that. How does that work? Like, and especially even people who are outside of the church, they're even more shocked by it. Wow, that's how that works.
No categories for that kind of oppression.
Yeah. They really don't outside of politics. I think outside of politics, they don't have a system or structure that they can necessarily connect with. Now, some people have had, like, they get it from a standpoint of, like, maybe they've had family issues of, like, divorce or things like that. They can understand, like, a fracturing in that way. Right. But, like, they don't understand it being connected to Jesus.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Which I'm like, I guess I shouldn't understand it. Like, it shouldn't be familiar to me, but
Yeah.
it kind of is. Like, I get it. Like, and yeah. Share with me a moment where you felt, I guess, well, maybe share with me a little bit of your catalyst for leaving ministry, the ministry you were in. You were what, an associate pastor at a church plant, kind of campus type situation?
Yeah.
What was some of the catalysts for you transitioning out of that? Was it a particular issue like LGBT or like racial reconciliation, or just an amalgamation of a bunch of different things kind of coming together?
Yeah. So back in 2004, 2005, I was an associate pastor at a daughter church of Saddleback.
Okay.
So it was like, kind of a pseudo emerging church with candles and rock music and, younger demographic.
Gotcha.
Really good guys. There's 4 of us men on, just starting this thing. And like one of the things that was, I had a really good friend in Colorado who was going to Iliff Seminary, and he was feeding me John Howard Yoder, Politics of Jesus. He was feeding me Shane Claybourne and Brian McLaren, and I was sitting on the beach on the weekend and reading, commentaries on Gospels and stuff, and I just was feeling the tension of these core convictions, these core evangelical convictions. So basic convictions like the idea that if you don't invite Jesus into your heart, you're going to heaven, or you're going to hell.
Yeah.
Like these are things that just like didn't make sense to me anymore. Like that's crazy, and it doesn't match up with the biblical witness. There's a theology that just kind of bends and twists these passages to turn it into a justification by faith type of adventure. And then just like the Republican politics part of it was huge, the inerrant Bible. So I started to question all of those things first.
Yeah.
And as I approached members on staff at the church and other folks, I couldn't find people that would give ear to that.
Yeah.
It was too scary for them to go down a journey like that. And I wasn't in a place at that point with around issues of sexuality. Like that wasn't until 2007, 2008, being in seminary, starting to wrestle with the text and understand different ways of viewing the Bible.
Yeah.
That I can be in that space. So, but everything in me just wanted to pour all of my time and energy into studying the Bible, and that's why we went to Fuller Seminary, and I started teaching just
Did
part-time.
you walk away from your position on staff then? Like just because, were you realizing like these questions aren't questions I can have and be in this leadership position?
That's right.
Is that kind of the situation you find yourself in?
Yeah, and I was always bivocational, so I never got a paycheck from the church. I was always just doing it with as much time as I could put into it. And at that point in 2005, I just realized I'm still teaching, I'm still coaching, and I want to go to seminary, and I want to pour all my free time into just studying the text and studying theology. Yeah. And so I just didn't have any time to be able to like be in this in-between space and try to pastor folks and be in leadership. And it was one of the best decisions I've ever made to give myself to that for 3 years. Yeah. And just pour myself into it.
Am I right that Rick Warren was also, did they do like a presidential debate there?
Yeah.
I feel like one year they did, right? Was that around the time you were there, or maybe a couple years after?
So 2008, right. Okay. Kind of right after we left, but we still like knew a ton of people there. They called it the Civil Forum. It was Obama and McCain that year.
What do you think about that? From a standpoint of like, do you think churches should have debates like that? I don't know what I think about that.
Yeah. I'm not sure what I think about it either. I think churches should be deeply political because Jesus was, and so I think. And our politics goes way beyond electoral politics.
Yes, definitely.
But I think, I mean, sometimes I go back and read the transcript of that presidential debate, and it's eerie. It's like Rick Warren is asking these questions, and one of the questions, of course, is about Christian faith. And McCain, I mean, you can look back on the transcript. It's just like, is he a Christian? Is he a disciple of Jesus? I don't know. He's kind of just checking the box. Like, he's kind of in an Episcopal faith that's like, you can see that it's like, this is not something that's part of him.
Yeah.
Obama is like, Christian faith has deeply moved him. Like you can see in his response, but like at the end of the debate, you survey like evangelicals, McCain is clearly the Christian, and it all rises and falls on the abortion issue.
Oh yeah,
100%. Yeah, and of course all the undergirding that goes
all the undergirding between the Republican and Democrat, and between who's God's candidate and who's not.
Oh yeah,
and all of that. Yeah. I just think it's interesting because I do believe. So politics, the root word of politics is just how we organize community. Like that's just really what it is. How do we organize our communities? Like, and communities that organize. I mean, I think from anthropological studies, it seems like communities that organize beyond like 200 people become infinitely complex at that point because we don't agree well once we get to a certain size, and you see that in churches, mega churches. I'll tell you from my experience on being on a mega church staff, I don't wish it on any of my friends that are pastors to be at a mega church. Look, I'd love for you to have the influence, but I know what that looks like on the back end. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's not a pleasurable place to be when you get on that. I don't think it's a coincidence that we see some of those pastors having either moral failings or even committing suicide. I think the pressures in that position that are placed on you by so many people and that you place on yourself are in a lot of ways unbearable. I don't think you're meant to.
It's not a great way to make decisions and hold power.
Exactly. And so I think when you think about politics being how we organize as a community, I think the church should be arguing for a different kind of politics, for a different kind of organization, for a different kind of way that we, a way that we gather, a way that we connect with one another, and also listen to one another, and listen to each other's experiences, and develop a structure that's beneficial for the whole,
right?
That embodies the fruits of the Spirit.
Yeah.
So to the extent that the church should be political, I think the church should be a light into the political system that shows like there's a different way to organize. Yeah. Even when we get to a point of millions and millions of people trying to organize around all kinds of complicated issues, there's a way to do this. But I think the moment the church tries to say, so let me do that from a position of power over, I think the power is under. I think the power is when we come alongside under and we say, hey, there's this gift that exists under here. Like, it's for everybody. Like, it's not, we're not like going to hold it over your head. Come, you can have it. Like, and look, that might be like very idealistic. And like, again, I'm coming from a position of privilege that can say that, and there's not a whole lot on the line for me if it doesn't work, right? Whereas some people, like, literally their lives are on the line. Like, but I do think there's a different politic to be, and when I listen to Martin Luther King Jr. talk about the church and talk about politics, it tends to be in that space that I'm like, I can get behind this. Like, I can get behind the Reverend in that way. Yeah. Like, a lot of what he said about that intersection to me seemed to be, at the very best, better than what we're doing now. Maybe not perfect. I don't know that there is a perfect, but better. Yeah. I don't know. Oh yeah. You're a big fan of Martin Luther King Jr. too? Oh yeah. Deeply moved me. There's a ton of my own journey with Martin Luther King in the book. But for me, King he's so accessible. His speeches, it's so easy to just to read a letter from a Birmingham jail, to read his Beyond Vietnam speech, which is, perhaps the greatest speech ever. Got him in a lot of trouble with his own community. Oh man, that speech did. I mean, just denounced by every newspaper in
the United States. And
that was equivalent to him. In studying his history and his biography, that almost seems like equivalent to him in like 2012 being a white evangelical pastor coming out as supporting the LGBT community,
right.
like on a platform.
That's right.
Like he got everyone.
Yeah.
People who are like right by his side in marches are like, I'm out.
Yeah.
Like, this is too much.
Yeah. Yeah. Why'd you do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And clearly today, obviously on the right side of history, but in that speech, just charting a radical revolution of values, a new way forward for Christian people, but obviously for American people, and in the last 50 years, obviously, a majority of folks and the way that power has not moved in that way, has continuously supported profit instead of people, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, yeah, King is the American prophet. In 1967, even before he gave that speech, like if you look at his poll ratings, they had him even back then. It was like 25% of Americans liked him, 25%, and 15 years after he was assassinated, it was up to 80%. And the point I make in the book is that that people didn't change the way they thought about King. They changed King. They turned him into this kind of meek and mild black man with a little, American dream that we can all get together and, agree with one another. But he had prophetic fire that was the reason people hated him, and that's why he was killed, just like Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so we can see these like strong parallels between King and Jesus. It's the same thing that's going on. These are prophetic voices that people hated because of how they talked and the truth that they spoke, and that's why they were killed. And then people turned them into different people with different messages.
I think it's called The Radical King. I read that book. I've read quite a few King books.
It's that one of Cornell's.
That's the one of Cornell.
Book.
Yeah. And it was so good because he just dismantled, in essence, the ways in which King has been just so muted,
deodorized, sanitized,
and done. Yeah, The Radical King, Cornell West, and then there's like all kinds of different. I do Audible, so I'm looking at it here. All kinds of different people on it, and then Death of a King was by Tavis Smiley. That was a great book.
That was good. Yeah.
But like, I go back to like, it's amazing to me to see how committed King was to doing the right thing, even when the time maybe wasn't right, the time people weren't ready, or like, I mean, that's. Mm-hmm. It's a hard thing to be in that position where like the consequences of saying that, and he was championing nonviolence in a time where like that wasn't a conversation in the church. Not that it even is now. I don't know about you. I always say I never really grew up. I can't remember any time in my church, all the way through college, hearing anyone in my church or in my theological influence, church influence, Jesus influence, arguing for nonviolence.
Yeah.
Never once.
Yeah, I don't.
Every once in a while, we'd have a conversation about turn the other cheek and what that meant. But it always usually came with the caveat of like, well, don't let people like beat you up, like, and
got to defend ourselves.
Yeah, got to defend ourselves. So like, it always came with this like but attached to it. Like all nonviolence always came with this like severe like we can't go that far. And I always think it's so interesting that like Dr. King, Leo Tolstoy, Gandhi, the biggest influences in my nonviolent, like even seeing Jesus as nonviolent, were those people, not the pastors I grew up with who taught from the passages that said things that championed nonviolence, but then either worked their ways around it, didn't really emphasize it. I just think like we've overlooked a very big portion of Jesus' teachings, and King refused to overlook it.
That's right.
King refused to overlook that radical piece, even like some of the crazy things, like getting his house bombed and coming out on the front lawn to people like ready to go to war, and like telling them to put their guns away and to go home, and like, and you're just like, oh man, if you bomb my house with my wife and kids in it, I don't know. Like I want to believe I'm a nonviolent person. I want to believe like Jesus has transformed me.
That happens.
But like
that
I also
down.
am human, and like you just see like his belief in that like nonviolence. We can remake this world with love. Like we can remake a lot of the pain that we've experienced as a community, and I'm speaking him saying that as the black community has experienced that as slaves and as and the systematic racism that existed at this time. We can move forward, but if we respond with violence, we're not reconciling. We're not forgiving. We're not doing well when we do that. And I just think the tension he lived in was a life and death tension.
Right.
The church isn't even in that right now. And even without the life or death tension, like we just can't seem to like own that like Jesus is clearly nonviolent. Like clear. There's no, for Jesus, like, and for the context of his day, take up your cross is like legit, like a crucifixion. Like this is what it means to follow me. I don't know. I mean,
big words. Yeah. And I just thoroughly agree with, the Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel has this like classic quote where he says, the whole future of America depends on the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Wow.
And I think that that's absolutely spot on. It's are we going to follow that path, or are we not?
A lot of what, like, when you go back and read King's speeches, sermons, or even just historians like quoting him and sharing information about him, you realize how much what he was talking about is one for one applicable to stuff we're going through today politically.
Oh yeah.
It's not like you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Like, it's the continuation of things that he was working through that exist now even.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well, we have this event about to start. We got to get some food. So do you want to tell anybody where they can find out more about you? Like if they want to follow you online, if they want to buy your book, obviously they can go to Amazon. But
check out the book. Check out radicaldiscipleship.net. I'm a co-curator of that site, so I write quite a bit there.
Okay, radicaldiscipleship.net.
Yeah.
Got it.
All
right.
More of that stuff. Yeah.
Tom, thanks so much.
Thanks for letting me talk a little bit and
it was
share.
Good.
Yeah. Great to be with you.
First episode of 2020 in the books. So excited you could join me for this episode of the podcast. Huge thanks for Tommy Airey being with me today on this episode and sharing his story and his passion. Please go read his book, Descending Like a Dove, Adventures in Decolonizing Evangelical Christianity. Such a great story. Get that book at Amazon. Definitely check it out. Also, I now have a Patreon page, patreon.com/Beyond Boundaries podcast. If you want to and are able to support the show financially, that would be amazing. I would feel so blessed by that. You can also support the show, though, by subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing. Getting the word out really does mean a lot, and I'm always so thankful when others see this as something worthy of sharing with their friend network. So thank you for that. If you'd like to find the show notes for this episode or others, you can go to pastorjustindouglas.com. May you go and live a life that is beyond boundaries, giving others love, exploring new ideas, and championing belonging.